Hello everyone, my name is Jack Franklin. I'm a developer evangelist here at Pusher, and welcome to this new set of videos on the Elm programming language. Elm is a language that I've been playing with for a while now. I've grown very fond of it. I've really enjoyed working with it. And in this set of series, I'm going to introduce the language to you, and together we're going to build some Elm applications. Elm brings the idea of typed reactive functional programming into the browser as a new way to build ambitious, large web applications. This means that it can take a bit of time to get used to Elm. Its syntax and ideas are very different to JavaScript. Once you do, I think you'll find it a really enjoyable language to work with. Today what we're going to do is see how we install Elm, play around with some of its features in the REPL before building our very first Hello World Elm application. So the first thing we need to do is install Elm. The best way to do that is head to the website at elmlang.org, click the install button. That will bring you to this page where there is an installer for Mac and Windows. There's also an npm installer and instructions for building from source as well if you'd like to. I highly recommend just picking the installer for your platform, downloading that and just running it as normal. Once you've installed Elm, if you head into your terminal, you should be able to type Elm and get an output that looks somewhat like this. At the time of recording, the current version of Elm is 0.16.0, and that's the version that I'm running here. By default, when you install Elm, you get a few commands available to you. Today we'll look at package, reactor, and REPL, but we'll leave make for a future video. If you can run the Elm command without any problems, everything is set up correctly, and now we can start writing some Elm. To get started with Elm, we're just going to play around with some of its features in the REPL. REPL stands for read eval print loop, and it's a way that we can type Elm commands and get the result printed back in our console. It's a really nice way to start playing with some of the features of a language. To run this, I just type Elm REPL and hit enter. That puts us into this REPL. We can type Elm commands and see the result printed back. For example, I can do 2 + 2. And you can see I get back 4. Notice as well that when we return this number 4 here, we also got :number. This is Elm telling us the type of the return value, in this case 4, which is a number. Elm has a number of built-in types, most of which we'll meet throughout this series, and it also has a way that we can add our own types to the language. This comes in really handy when building bigger applications, and it's something we'll tackle in a later video. We can use equals to see if two values are alike, much like in JavaScript. And you can see here I get back true, which is of type Boolean. By default, Elm doesn't really include too much in its standard runtime like this, but what it does provide is a lot of modules that we can import for us, and these form what is called the core library. For example, Elm has a string module, which provides lots of functions for working with and manipulating strings, and to access that we need to import it. So I type import string, and I've now imported the string module, which I can then use. I'll leave a link in the description with this video to the documentation on the Elm website for the string module. For example, one of the functions that the string module provides is empty, which checks if a given string is empty or not. So we type string, and then dot is empty, and then we can give it a string. So if I give it the string foo, a string here in Elm is just double quotes, just like in JavaScript. However, please note that single quotes aren't strings in Elm. You always have to use double quotes. This is going to return false because foo is not an empty string. However, if I type string is empty and give it an empty string, we get back true. Unlike in JavaScript, where we might call methods on objects, for example, if we have the string foo in JavaScript, we might call foo.length to get its length. In Elm, you'll always give the object you're working with, such as the string foo, to a function that's on a module. In Elm, functions and data are kept entirely separate, so you have modules that contain a bunch of functions, such as the string module, and then you have data, such as the string foo. So we always take data and we give it to functions that are defined on modules. If I did want to check the length of a string in Elm, I would use the length function that's defined on the string module. You can see I get back 3, which is an integer. Note what happens when I type string.length and don't give it any arguments. I get back a function called length, and then I get this, what's called a type annotation here. And you can read this from left to right as the types of all the arguments a function takes, and then the type of its result. So in this case, the function length takes one argument, which is of type string. So that's our foo string here. And the result is always an integer, which is the result we got back here. So if you're ever not entirely sure how a function works in Elm, just type it in the REPL without any arguments, and Elm will tell you what type that function is. We're now going to start making inroads into building our first Elm application. In a future episode, we'll look at building Elm apps properly and structuring them, but for now we're going to use one of the built-in Elm tools, the Elm reactor, to run our app locally without any effort on our part. To do this, we first need to create an Elm application. To do that, we're going to use the Elm package manager. We say Elm package install like that. Without any additional arguments, what this will do is it will tell Elm that we want to create a new package, and it will go off and download the core Elm libraries and set up our project for us. You see here it's going to ask me if I approve of the plan to install the core of Elm. I'm going to say Y for yes, and it's going to download Elm and configure our package. If you look inside this folder, you'll see elmpackage.json. This is a JSON file that contains information about our project and its dependencies, and you'll also see a folder called Elm stuff. This contains a bunch of the source code for Elm, and it's a folder that you really don't need to worry about at all. In fact, most people add it to their git ignore, so it's never even checked into source control. So now we have our Elm project created, we need to actually create an Elm file. So at this point you need to load up the text editor of your choice. I personally am a Vim user, and we're going to create a file called main.elm. The name here doesn't actually matter, you can name it whatever you like. But please note the Elm convention as well that we save file names that are Elm modules with a capital letter at the beginning. So this is main.elm with a capital M. Every Elm file starts off with a module declaration. The name of the module has to match the file name. So in this case, we're going to have a module called main. And then we have the keyword where. The first thing we might do is import any modules we need. In our case, we're going to use one of the built-in modules that Elm provides called graphics.element. Graphics.element contains a bunch of functions that's useful for putting data and text onto the screen in the browser. And for now, this is what we're going to use to display Hello World on the screen. So first, I'm going to import graphics.element. I'm also just going to leave a space between the two lines just to make it a bit neater. When we run our code, Elm is going to look for a function called main. This function has to be defined. And when we ask Elm to run the file, it will automatically execute this function. To define a function in Elm, we type the name of the function, in our case main. We then type any arguments that we wanted this function to take, but in our case the main function isn't going to take any arguments. Later on we'll write functions that do take arguments and we'll see how they work then. We then type equals, and then indent down a line. Now in here we're ready to write our function's body. In our case, I'm going to use a function in graphics.element called show. This function takes a string and places it onto the page. Now, in another terminal tab, I'm going to run Elm reactor. This will fire up the Elm reactor on localhost 8000, and this provides an environment in which I can get Elm to automatically execute and run my code without me having to run anything else locally. This is really nice when you're just getting started with Elm. Rather than having to deal with the hassle of getting Elm to compile and produce JavaScript, we can just go through the reactor. So now that I have the Elm reactor running, I can head to localhost 8000 in my browser, and you'll see something that looks like this. It tells us our directories, our other files, and more importantly, the Elm files that we have available. And you can see here that Elm has found that we have main.elm. All you have to do now to compile and run that file is just to click on it. So click on main.elm. And here it takes me to localhost 8000/main.elm, and you can indeed see that we have Hello World written on the screen in front of us. So that's it, that's our first Elm application done. It doesn't do much, but we have managed to compile Elm into JavaScript and render Hello World onto the screen. In our next video, we'll use this as a starting point to start exploring more of Elm's features. In particular, we'll look at functions, how we define functions that take arguments. We'll then look at some of the more common built-in Elm modules that we'll use a lot, such as the string module that we've seen a bit already, and the list module. In addition, we'll also look at records, which are Elm's equivalent to JavaScript objects, and we'll dive a bit more into Elm's type system and see how we can define our own types and why that's a really useful feature to have. In the meantime, that's it for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please feel free to send me a tweet or drop me an email. There'll be links in the description below, and I'll see you for more Elm next time.